How to get out of burnout. When you don't know what's burning you out, you wake up tired. Not the kind of tired that fades after coffee or a slow morning, but the kind that wraps around your bones and stays there. You slept, but you're not rested. You paused your responsibilities, took time off, slowed things down. But somehow, it made things worse. Still you show up. Still you try. And yet something in you is quietly vanishing. This is not just burnout. It's a form of existential erosion. You are not on fire from overworking. You are slowly being extinguished by something you can't even name. And that's the most terrifying part. Because when you know what's burning you out, you can fight it. You can say, "It's my job, it's this schedule, it's this relationship." But when the exhaustion has no face, when the weight on your chest has no source, you start doubting your own mind. You begin to ask yourself, is it me? Am I broken? The modern world celebrates function and speed. It rewards you for producing, regardless of whether your inner world is collapsing. And if you're high functioning, if you're the one everyone depends on, you become the most invisible. People praise your stability while you're silently unraveling behind your eyes. Burnout without cause is a slow psychological suffocation. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It doesn't destroy with fire, it numbs with silence. And the silence gets louder each day you're unable to explain what's happening to you. Science has a term for this internal state mismatch. When your outer performance doesn't align with your internal depletion, your brain begins to disassociate from itself. Andrew Huberman would tell you your prefrontal cortex starts to lose control over your stress response. Your dopamine system short-circuits. You stop being able to experience anticipation. Your inner compass blurs, and that disorientation, it feels like failure. But failure of what? That's the question that lingers in the soul of every person who can't name what's burning them out. It's not that your work is too hard. It's that your life has become too quiet in the wrong places. You're tired, not just because of effort, but because of emptiness. René Descartes believed that thinking was the core of being. But what happens when your thoughts feel fractured, unfocused, and foreign? What happens when even thinking, your most personal act, feels distant from who you are? That's not just burnout. That's a crisis of consciousness. This is the kind of exhaustion that doesn't want more sleep, it wants more meaning. But here's the truth that might start to pull you back. Your body and mind aren't trying to fail you. They are begging you to listen. They are protecting you from continuing in a life that no longer nourishes your soul. Burnout is not your enemy. It is your signal. It is the emergency brake pulled by your nervous system, by your deepest identity, by the part of you that remembers who you were before performance replaced presence. The path out of burnout isn't paved with productivity. It's found in recovery of clarity. You don't need to fix everything. You don't need to escape your life. You need to find the flame again. Not the fire that consumes you, but the one that guides you. Because what burns you out the most is not overdoing. It's underbeing. And now that you've finally stopped long enough to feel that, we begin. When rest makes you more tired, you take a break. You cancel plans. You clear your schedule, hoping silence will feel like relief. You sleep a full night, maybe even two. You watch something light. You tell yourself you're resting. But then the discomfort sets in. Not physical exhaustion, but a strange inner ache, a fog, a heaviness you can't shake. And when it's time to return to life, you don't feel recharged, you feel heavier. This is the moment where confusion becomes panic, because rest is supposed to help. Everyone says it does, but you're realizing that resting is only restorative when your exhaustion comes from the right place. And maybe, just maybe, your exhaustion isn't about lack of sleep, but lack of alignment. You weren't just tired, you were disconnected, and sleep can't fix that. Andrew Huberman explains that true rest isn't just about shutting down the body. It's about down-regulating the nervous system. When your body is in a chronic state of alert, your sympathetic nervous system hijacks the process. You lie down, but your heart rate doesn't slow. Your mind races. Your cortisol never resets. So you wake up as tense as when you closed your eyes. But it gets deeper. You're trying to rest a body that's obeying a mind in conflict. And as long as your thoughts are rooted in guilt, pressure, comparison, or internal noise, rest becomes another battlefield. You try to sleep, but your unconscious doesn't feel safe enough to let go. And why would it? It doesn't trust the world you've built around it. You're sleeping in survival mode. That's why some of the most exhausted people are those who have nothing on their plate. Their lives appear calm, but their inner world is boiling, because burnout isn't solved by absence of activity. It's solved by presence of meaning. And if the space you create isn't filled with reflection, connection, or emotional realignment, it becomes a vacuum that drains you faster. We've been told to rest more, but no one taught us how to rest in a way that heals. The reason you feel worse after doing nothing isn't because you're lazy. It's because your nothing wasn't intentional. It wasn't restoration. It was collapse. You didn't choose to rest. You gave up. And the difference between those two isn't visible on the outside, but it's everything on the inside. René Descartes said, "The preservation of health should be the first study of one who is wise." But what is health? It's not simply physical strength. It's the clarity of your mind, the harmony of your emotions, the stillness of your inner landscape. Rest that doesn't return you to those things is not healing, it's distraction. And no amount of distraction will save a soul that's starving for reconnection. This is why vacations don't work the way we hope. We leave our routine, we change our setting, but we bring the same haunted thoughts, the same loops of uncertainty, the same question, why do I still feel like this? So we scroll more, eat more, isolate more, hoping something will numb the question, but it won't. Because the question isn't going away. It's coming from a deeper part of you that refuses to be silenced anymore. Rest is not about disconnecting from work. It's about reconnecting with yourself. And in burnout, that reconnection becomes the most difficult and the most essential act of all. Because you're not just mentally fatigued, you're existentially misaligned, and no external pause can compensate for an internal misfire. This is where cognitive behavioral therapy opens a window. When you don't know why you're tired, you begin by identifying what thoughts dominate your quiet moments. Do you feel worthless when unproductive, anxious when alone, guilty when still? These patterns keep your brain locked in low-grade panic even when the world goes silent. That's not laziness. That's learned survival. And survival is exhausting. Your rest doesn't work because it's not entering the nervous system. It's just bouncing off the surface. Until you feel safe enough to truly release control, your body will keep burning fuel, even in stillness. And that fuel, your focus, your clarity, your drive, is not infinite. That's why you feel like you're fading. But here's the breakthrough. Your body isn't broken. It's just responding logically to the emotional inputs you've been feeding it. The story you carry about yourself, about your worth, your productivity, your purpose, that's what determines the quality of your rest. And when rest fails, it's usually because that story hasn't changed. To begin healing, you don't need a new routine. You need a new relationship, with stillness, with presence, with your inner voice. And maybe for the first time in a long time, you need to listen not to what the world demands from you, but what your soul has been whispering when everything else gets quiet. Because that whisper is your way back. The hidden burners. When identity, not tasks, drains you, you think you're tired from doing too much. You look at your calendar, your inbox, your to-do list, and assume that's where your energy went. But there's something far more subtle, far more dangerous, draining you daily. The person you believe you have to be in order to be accepted, respected, or simply left in peace. Burnout often isn't born from workload. It comes from identity load, the quiet, invisible pressure of maintaining a version of yourself that's performative, fragmented, and disconnected from who you really are. Every time you say yes when you mean no. Every time you smile when you want to scream. Every time you act like everything's okay just to be palatable. You're burning mental fuel. Not because of action, but because of dissonance. This emotional dissonance is one of the most expensive things your brain pays for. According to Daniel Goleman, when we engage in behavior that contradicts our core values, the brain's limbic system activates a subtle stress response. You begin producing cortisol, your heart rate fluctuates, your nervous system stays slightly on edge, and your prefrontal cortex, the seat of your reasoning, starts losing focus. Not because you ran a marathon, because you're living a version of your life that doesn't match your truth. So you're not drained by what you do. You're drained by what you deny. And when this becomes chronic, something inside you fractures. You begin to forget what you want. You lose clarity around what actually matters to you. You function like a machine with a corrupted core code, still working, still productive, but at a silent cost that eventually demands payment. You feel tired after conversations, not because they were long, but because you had to edit every word. You feel wiped out after social events, not because you don't like people, but because you showed up as a version of you that doesn't exist anymore. You feel numb in your own skin, not because you lack emotion, but because you've been taught to suppress your own signal to make others comfortable. This is identity burnout. It hides behind perfectionism, behind high achievement, behind people-pleasing. It hides in the voice that says, "Keep it together," when you're falling apart. It hides in the roles you never agreed to, but feel trapped in. It hides in the persona you constructed to survive, not realizing that survival isn't the same as living. Jordan Peterson often speaks about the power of integrating chaos with order, of bringing the unknown parts of yourself into conscious structure. But if your whole identity has been structured around avoiding disapproval, suppressing discomfort, and playing a role, you're not building a self. You're building a mask. And masks are heavy. Neuroscience confirms that maintaining a socially acceptable persona that's misaligned with your internal state increases cognitive load. Your brain is working overtime, not to think clearly, but to avoid being exposed. And exposure doesn't even mean anything catastrophic. It just means someone seeing that you're not okay. But here's the paradox, that fear of being seen is the very thing keeping you exhausted. You long to be understood, but you're too afraid to stop performing. You want to rest, but you're terrified of what people will think if you show the version of you that actually needs that rest. So you keep pretending, you keep performing, and you keep breaking. René Descartes once said, "The greatest minds are capable of the greatest vices as well as the greatest virtues." And one of the greatest vices in modern times is disconnection from self in the name of functionality. You're not failing, you're fragmented. You've been surviving so well that you've forgotten you were meant to feel whole. You don't need to escape your life. You need to re-enter it with the truth of who you are, not the persona that made others feel comfortable. This is why burnout won't be fixed by better time management. Because the source isn't in your schedule, it's in your self-perception. The healing begins the moment you realize you've been showing up to your life as someone else. The moment you stop blaming your fatigue on tasks and start listening to what part of you is starving for permission to be. The moment you stop hiding behind how much you do and start asking why you're doing it. Because maybe what's been burning you out isn't work or people or responsibility. Maybe it's the cost of betraying your own identity, slowly, silently, for too long. Dopamine depletion, the silent saboteur. You used to wake up with some kind of spark. Maybe it wasn't fire, but it was something. Curiosity, excitement, purpose. Now, even on good days, there's a numbness. The things that used to bring joy barely register. Even things you want to do feel like effort. You wonder what happened to your motivation, your drive, your hunger for life. It didn't disappear overnight. It was drained, slowly, silently, by a mechanism inside your brain you've probably never noticed. That mechanism is dopamine. Andrew Huberman describes dopamine not as a pleasure chemical, but as the currency of motivation and anticipation. It's what fuels you toward a goal. It's not about the reward itself, It's about the pursuit of something that feels meaningful. When dopamine is flowing, effort feels energized. But when dopamine is depleted, effort feels like weight. You can still move, but it's like walking through fog with your limbs tied down. It's not depression in the clinical sense. It's dopaminergic fatigue, and it's everywhere. What causes it? Constant stimulation, artificial novelty, endless scrolling, notifications, noise, urgency without meaning. You train your brain to expect fast hits of stimulation without engagement. But your brain was never designed for that. You're consuming more pleasure signals than ever before, but each hit comes without depth, so the reward system starts to flatten. You become desensitized. You don't feel more joy. You feel less. You're not satisfied. You're overstimulated and underfulfilled. And the worst part? You start to confuse this numbness with laziness. But it's not laziness. It's burnout from chemical overdrive. You're not unwilling. You're unable. The system that once propelled you forward is overloaded. It's the equivalent of slamming your foot on the gas pedal with no fuel in the tank. You flood the engine. Dopamine doesn't just run out. It recalibrates based on your habits. When you chase instant gratification over sustained engagement, your baseline dopamine drops. That means things that require effort, writing, building, healing, connecting, feel unbearable. Not because they're impossible, but because your brain has forgotten how to anticipate meaning without being hijacked by noise. You feel lost, not because your goals are unclear, but because the chemical map that once gave you direction has faded. And directionless humans don't stop, they spiral. Here's the irony. The more you try to fix this with more stimulation, more content, more distractions, more short-term goals, the deeper the depletion becomes. Like drinking salt water to quench your thirst. René Descartes believed that clarity of mind was the foundation of reason, but dopamine depletion clouds that clarity. It makes your inner world disorganized. The simplest tasks feel impossible, not because they're complex, but because your inner architecture is misfiring. Your mind knows what to do, but your brain won't respond. You're not broken. Your pathways are just dim. This is where people fall into shame. They call themselves lazy, undisciplined, ungrateful. But shame only deepens the cycle. It feeds the hopelessness, which reduces dopamine even further. Now you're not only chemically imbalanced, you're spiritually defeated. And that combination makes burnout feel eternal. But there's a way back. It begins with resetting the system. Not by quitting everything, but by rebalancing what you consume. When you remove the noise, the novelty, the need to constantly react, you create space for natural dopamine to return, space for meaning to be felt again, space for silence to heal. It starts with micro decisions. Put your phone down for an hour. Go outside without a podcast. Breathe deeply without needing a reason. Engage with something slowly. Let your nervous system relearn the rhythm of presence. Your brain doesn't need constant entertainment. It needs authentic engagement. Jordan Peterson often says, pick up the heaviest thing you can carry and carry it. That isn't just about responsibility, it's about depth. When you engage with something deeply, meaningfully, even if it's hard, you rebuild dopamine the right way. You reteach your brain that effort is not suffering, it's sacred. That's how you get out of the cycle. You stop chasing more. You start choosing real. And when your dopamine starts to rise again, not from the outside, but from within, you'll begin to feel it. The spark, the curiosity, the small sense that life is not just tolerable, but worth leaning into. Not because everything is fixed, but because for the first time in a long time, you're no longer numbing yourself to feel alive. The illusion of having to be okay. You've built a life around holding it together. You smile when you're supposed to, say, I'm fine when you're anything but, and power through conversations, deadlines, and days like someone who's completely in control. No one would suspect that something inside you is quietly unraveling. You're the strong one, the reliable one, the one people look to for support. But what if your strength is the very thing burning you out? There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from performing wellness. not from being well, but from looking like it. It's the emotional strain of managing how others perceive you while ignoring what's happening beneath your skin. And the longer you carry that image, the harder it becomes to admit, especially to yourself, that you're not okay. This is not vanity, it's survival. You learned early, maybe from your family, maybe from society, that vulnerability was dangerous, that breakdowns made people uncomfortable, that pain was a burden others weren't willing to carry. So you adapted. You learned how to smile through sadness, how to work through grief, how to stay composed when you wanted to scream. And in that adaptation, something precious was buried. Your authentic signal. René Descartes taught us that the mind is a powerful compass. But what happens when your mind is trained to ignore its own distress signals? When your logic tells you shouldn't feel this way, or others have it worse, or you just need to toughen up. That's not reason. That's repression disguised as rationality, and repression is a slow poison. Daniel Goleman explains that when emotions are suppressed, they don't disappear. They embed themselves deeper into your nervous system. Your body begins to carry what your mind refuses to acknowledge. Tension in the jaw, tightness in the chest, chronic fatigue, sleepless nights. Not because of what's happening outside, but because of the war you're fighting inside. The war between who you are and who you pretend to be. The illusion of being okay is one of the most destructive forces in a high-functioning person's life. You can show up, perform, produce, and even help others, while silently bleeding out from the inside. And because the outside looks fine, no one notices. They applaud your strength while you suffocate under its weight. This is where burnout becomes invisible. No one checks on you because you're always the strong one. You're not crying for help. You're not falling apart in public. You're composed, stable. But deep down, you're tired of holding the pieces. Tired of pretending. Tired of wondering when it's your turn to fall apart. The truth is, pretending to be okay is far more exhausting than actually facing what's not. Because pretending requires constant performance, constant masking, constant vigilance. You're managing other people's perceptions on top of managing your own collapse. And that is unsustainable. At some point, your body will rebel. It will force the breakdown you've been denying. Not out of punishment, but out of protection. Andrew Huberman's research shows that long-term emotional suppression keeps the body in a low-grade fight-or-flight state. Even when nothing is wrong, your system remains activated, alert, on edge. And when that stress response never shuts off, you live in burnout without ever seeing the fire. So what's the way out? It begins with permission. Permission to not be okay. To stop performing wellness. To stop filtering your emotions through what's socially acceptable. To be human before being strong. That shift, internal, honest, terrifying, is the beginning of recovery. You don't have to collapse publicly. You don't need to expose your heart to everyone. But you do need a space, internal or external, where you tell the truth, where you stop minimizing your pain, where you stop comparing your suffering to others as if only the worst story earns compassion. Pain doesn't need a hierarchy. It needs acknowledgement. You are not weak for feeling overwhelmed. You are not a failure for needing a pause. You are not selfish for putting down what you were never meant to carry alone. The most powerful thing you can do when you feel like you have to hold it all together is to let one piece fall. Just one, and then another, and another. Until the illusion fades, and what's left is not a polished, perfect image, but a person. Real, wounded, awake, ready to heal. You're not meant to be okay all the time. You're meant to be true. And in that truth, the pressure begins to lift. The fractured self. When you stop hearing your inner voice. There's a moment, often subtle, when you stop recognizing yourself. You look in the mirror and the face looking back seems familiar, but distant. Your words still come out. Your body still moves. You reply to messages, show up to appointments, fulfill your role. But the thread that once tied all of it to you is gone. You're functioning, but you're disconnected from the one thing that gave it all meaning: your inner voice. At first, you don't notice the silence. Life is noisy enough to mask it. The notifications, the obligations, the need to be on all the time, they drown out the absence of that deeper dialogue. But then you reach for direction, and there's no answer. You ask yourself what you want, and you don't know. You wonder what feels right, and you can't tell. You try to trust your intuition, but it no longer speaks. This isn't burnout from exhaustion alone. It's the result of a fractured self. René Descartes believed that consciousness was the essence of being. Cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. But what if the thinking that defines your being is no longer yours? What if it's been overwritten by other people's expectations, your past survival strategies, your need to be liked, or your fear of rocking the boat? You're no longer led by what is real within you. You're guided by noise, by scripts, by echoes of what once mattered but no longer does. This is where identity burnout deepens into spiritual erosion. Daniel Goleman explains that self-awareness isn't simply introspection. It's emotional intelligence in action. It's knowing where you stand, what you feel, why you feel it, and what matters to you in this moment. But when you live in reaction mode long enough, always putting out fires, pleasing others, chasing goals that never felt like yours, you lose contact with that internal anchor. You drift. And the longer you drift, the harder it becomes to return. You tell yourself it's just a phase, a rut, a rough season. But deep down, you know, you've lost access to something sacred, that subtle guide within you that once whispered yes or no, that helped you discern, create, choose, walk away, move forward. It's silent. And in that silence, you begin to doubt not just your decisions, but your identity. You wonder if you've ever truly known who you are, or if you've just been constructing a version of yourself that fits the world better than your truth ever did. Andrew Huberman would tell you that the brain adapts to what it repeats. The more you override your intuition, the more your neural pathways reinforce that override. Over time, self-abandonment becomes efficient, automatic. You feel less and less because the circuits of self-trust go dormant. Not dead, just dormant, waiting for reactivation. And that's the tragedy. You're not broken, you're buried. Your inner voice isn't gone. It's muffled under years of noise, people-pleasing, perfectionism, and pretending. And the longer you go without listening to it, the more foreign your own life begins to feel. That's why nothing satisfies you. That's why you chase outcomes and feel empty when they arrive. You're succeeding in a structure that was never built for your soul. But it's not too late to return. Recovery begins not with answers, but with silence. Not with more effort, but with less interference. The voice inside you has never stopped speaking. It's just been drowned out by everything you've prioritized instead of yourself. You don't need to discover a new identity. You need to remove the layers that made you forget who you were. Sit in stillness, not to meditate perfectly or achieve enlightenment, but to listen, like someone waiting for a message from a loved one who's been silent for too long. You might not hear anything at first. That's okay. You've built walls. It takes time for the voice to reach through them again. Jordan Peterson speaks about the need to confront the unknown, chaos, to integrate it with your ordered self. But the unknown isn't just out there. Sometimes it's in you, in the parts of yourself you abandoned for the sake of acceptance or success. And if you're brave enough to face those hidden corners, to sit in the discomfort of not knowing who you are anymore, something remarkable happens. The voice returns. At first, it's a whisper, a nudge, a faint pull toward what feels real. But that's all you need. One thread, one honest impulse, one small decision that's made not to impress, not to perform, not to prove, but to align. From that moment on, healing becomes possible. Because now you're no longer living from the outside in. You're returning to yourself. Resilience misused. When stoicism becomes self-abandonment. You've been praised for your strength, for pushing through pain, for keeping your emotions in check. for being calm under pressure. You wear resilience like armor, and everyone applauds. But underneath that armor, something essential is weakening. You're no longer protecting yourself. You're abandoning yourself. Not out of weakness, but out of the very strength you thought would save you. There's a moment in the life of every high-functioning, self-disciplined, hyper-resilient person where they begin to collapse inward. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, invisibly. Because they've misunderstood what resilience really means. They've taken the Stoic ideal of self-control and twisted it into self-neglect. They've confused silence with healing, detachment with mastery, endurance with health, and it's killing them slowly. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But that doesn't mean suppress your needs. It doesn't mean ignore your pain. It means cultivate clarity, not numbness. It means face truth, not bury it. But in today's world, Stoicism is often weaponized against the self. People use it to shame their own emotions, to override their instincts, to keep functioning when they should be resting, grieving, or recalibrating. There is nothing noble about denying your humanity. True Stoicism, at its core, is not about emotional suppression. It's about emotional mastery. And mastery begins with acknowledgement. You cannot command what you refuse to see. And right now you're drowning in an internal storm you won't even name, because you've been trained to believe that needing help is weakness, that speaking up is indulgence, that feeling deeply is a liability. So you stay silent. You keep pushing. You don't break down, but you do break apart. Andrew Huberman would explain that your nervous system wasn't built to withstand unrelenting stress without recovery. You're keeping your composure, but your cortisol is spiking. Your heart rate variability is dropping. Your immune function is weakening. The cost of your strength is showing up in your biology. You're calm on the outside and inflamed on the inside. And here's the paradox. The very thing you admire in others, vulnerability, authenticity, courage to feel, is the thing you deny yourself every day. You think, if I let go even a little, I'll fall apart. But that's the lie that keeps you locked in isolation. You won't fall apart. You'll fall into yourself. Into the parts you've avoided, into the grief you delayed, into the truth you've numbed with work, with control, with relentless discipline. Jordan Peterson often says that confronting suffering voluntarily is the path to meaning. But voluntary doesn't mean robotic. It doesn't mean cold. It means willing. It means choosing to feel the weight of life without disowning your need for softness, support, or connection. Meaning isn't found in self-punishment. It's found in the space where pain meets presence. You've been strong for everyone. Now it's time to be honest with yourself. Resilience isn't about how much you can carry. It's about knowing when to put it down. When you carry too much for too long, without release, without processing, without asking why. It's not resilience. It's disconnection. And disconnection is the breeding ground of burnout. You tell yourself, I don't have time to fall apart. But you do. Because if you don't, your body will choose for you. It will shut you down. It will force the rest you refuse to give. It will create the silence you never made space for. And when that day comes, it won't be because you failed. It will be because you waited too long to let yourself be fully human. You don't need less strength. You need more self-compassion. You need to stop using your discipline to abandon yourself. You need to redefine resilience, not as holding it together no matter what, but as the courage to fall apart when it's time. Let that be your new strength, the kind that leads not to burnout, but to rebirth. Your nervous system is not lazy. It's begging for alignment. You think you're lazy, unmotivated, weak-willed. You wake up and you already feel behind. You try to focus, but your brain slips. You push your body, but it resists. Everything feels harder than it should. So you blame yourself. You think something is broken inside you. But what if the truth is far more precise? and far more liberating. You're not lazy. Your nervous system is misaligned. Burnout is not always a mental failure. Often, it's a physiological consequence. Your body isn't malfunctioning. It's communicating, loudly, consistently, through tension, fatigue, irritability, brain fog, and withdrawal. These aren't character flaws. They're messages. The question is, are you listening? Andrew Huberman explains that the autonomic nervous system controls whether you're in a state of survival or restoration. Most people live in chronic activation, fight, flight, or freeze. Your body is stuck in a loop where it constantly anticipates threat. Not because you're in danger, but because your brain has been conditioned to treat everyday life like an emergency. Every unanswered message, every looming deadline, every social comparison, every unresolved inner conflict, they don't feel like a direct threat, but your nervous system doesn't make that distinction. It reacts to perception. If your perception is that you're unsafe, unworthy, behind, judged, or alone, your body enters survival mode. And survival mode is expensive. It shuts down digestion. It tightens muscles. It speeds up the heart. It floods your system with cortisol. It makes long-term thinking feel impossible. It collapses creativity. It reduces empathy. It kills curiosity. Not because you're broken, but because you're preparing for a threat that never ends. Your body is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. You're not unmotivated. You're hypervigilant. You're not disorganized. You're chemically overloaded. You're not undisciplined. You're exhausted at a cellular level. Your nervous system is working perfectly for a world that's attacking you. But if your world is mostly internal noise, unresolved guilt, and unprocessed emotion, then you're defending yourself from your own life. And that is what burns you out. Not the work, not the people, not the hours. The war between your biology and your reality. René Descartes believed that the mind and body were distinct, but modern neuroscience shows us how deeply they're fused. You cannot treat mental fatigue without addressing the body. You cannot heal chronic stress through thought alone. You have to regulate, reset, realign. The real work of recovery begins in the nervous system, not with force, but with signal. Your body responds to signals of safety. These are small, consistent cues that tell your brain, you're not under attack, you're okay now. You can rest, you can breathe, you can exist without defending yourself from the next imagined catastrophe. So, what gives that signal? Slowness, eye contact, laughter, breath, music, nature, silence, stillness, honest words, gentle movement, kindness, rituals, boundaries, presence. When you intentionally give your body these signals, your vagus nerve activates your parasympathetic state. That's where healing begins. You've been trying to will yourself into motivation, but you don't need more willpower. You need physiological permission to stop surviving, and that requires something radical, a shift in how you view effort. Effort is not always the answer. Sometimes surrender is. Not the kind of surrender that gives up, but the kind that gives your body the conditions to come back online, to feel again, to breathe without urgency, to move without fear, to trust. Jordan Peterson reminds us that order is necessary to confront chaos. But if the chaos is inside your body, then your first task is to create inner order. Not through control, but through reconnection. You don't need to fight harder. You need to stop fighting yourself. Let your body speak. Let your nervous system reset. Let the burnout guide you not into more guilt, but into deeper alignment. Because you're not broken. You're just exhausted from surviving in a world that never taught you how to feel safe inside your own skin. And now, finally, you can begin to return. Your life is overscheduled, but undernourished. You're busy. Every day has a plan. Every hour is accounted for. You check your calendar more than your breath. You reply quickly. Keep things moving. Stay efficient. You know how to optimize, multitask, batch your time, keep things in flow. But under all of it, beneath the meetings, the notifications, the to-dos, there's a growing emptiness you can't ignore. You're living a life full of motion, but starved of meaning. This is the trap of the modern achiever. A life that looks productive on the outside but feels hollow on the inside. You're accomplishing tasks, but you're not touching anything that makes your soul stir. You're surrounded by information, but devoid of integration. You're active, but not alive. And here's the paradox that begins to surface. The more you fill your time, the less you feel filled. You've mastered the external demands of existence. But somewhere along the line, you stopped asking the internal questions. Why am I doing this? What is this schedule in service of? Is this life I've built mine, or just a polished structure designed to distract me from what I'm afraid to feel? You confuse movement with progress, but movement without purpose is just exhaustion. René Descartes once said that to live without philosophizing is to have one's eyes closed without attempting to open them. And that's what so many people are doing now, living with their eyes wide open to the clock, the feed, the algorithm, but blind to the aching absence of nourishment in their days. You can drink water, eat meals, even sleep, and still starve emotionally. Because the modern lifestyle teaches us how to fill time, not how to feed the soul. What feeds you is different. It's the quiet moment you actually taste your coffee, the long pause in the middle of a chaotic day, the 10 minutes of honest reflection with no agenda, the spontaneous text to someone you miss, the walk with no podcast, the conversation that doesn't need to be productive, the thing you do not because it leads to something, but because it reminds you you're alive. Andrew Huberman might explain this through neurochemistry. When your day is filled only with dopamine loops, short bursts of reward, novelty, urgency, you're overstimulating without satisfaction. Your brain feels active but not fulfilled. Over time, this leads to a flattening of emotional experience. The colors fade. The joy dims. You still show up, but your presence has thinned. You become efficient at surviving and malnourished in being. This is not your fault. You were trained to believe that time is something to conquer, not something to inhabit. That you must earn rest. That stillness is laziness. That creativity is a luxury. That emotional reflection is indulgent. But none of this is true. These beliefs are what starve you in plain sight. Daniel Goleman reminds us that attention is a finite resource, and the quality of your life is directly tied to where that attention goes. If every ounce of focus is consumed by deadlines, notifications, image management, and social comparison, what's left for the part of you that simply wants to feel connected, inspired, grounded? Nothing. And that's why you feel like you're fading, even as your schedule fills. Your burnout isn't just from too much. It's from too little of what matters. There's no space for play, for awe, for listening, for stillness, for communion with your own thoughts. You haven't been lazy. You've been so responsible that you forgot what it's like to be nourished by life itself, not just by results. Jordan Peterson would call this spiritual malnutrition, a collapse not of effort, but of meaning. A life shaped so tightly by structure that there's no oxygen left inside it. And when the soul can't breathe, the body breaks down. So here's what must change. Not your work ethic, not your goals, but your rhythm. You need to make space again. Not just empty time, nourishing time. Time where you do something because it awakens something in you. Not because it earns approval or checks a box. Time that isn't scheduled, but sacred. Your calendar may be full, but your heart doesn't have to be empty. Emotional micronutrients, what you're starving for. You've done everything right. You've worked hard. You've stayed disciplined. You've grown. You've kept going even when you were exhausted. You've checked the boxes that life asked you to check. But somewhere in the middle of all that effort, you've lost something. Not your ambition, not your strength. You've lost your ability to feel nourished, not in the body, but in the soul. Your burnout isn't just about stress or fatigue. It's about deficiency. Your life lacks what your nervous system and spirit were built to depend on. Small, consistent doses of connection, safety, spontaneity, joy, and meaning. These are your emotional micronutrients. And without them, your system begins to fail, not because of weakness, but because of starvation. Andrew Huberman would describe this as a mismatch between the brain's neurochemical needs and your daily inputs. You're consuming information, stimulation, content, and pressure, but you're not receiving what your brain actually thrives on. Oxytocin through touch and trust, serotonin through gratitude and presence, endorphins through laughter and movement, dopamine through purposeful anticipation, and silence for parasympathetic healing. And when these are absent, not once but habitually, you start to feel hollow, not broken, not ungrateful, just empty in a way you can't explain. Because you're functioning, but unfed. This is what nobody tells you. High-functioning people burn out not because they don't have energy, but because they've forgotten what restores it. You can live a life full of macronutrients, income, goals, status, and still die a little inside each day from the lack of micronutrients that no one sees or measures. Emotional nourishment is invisible, but its absence is catastrophic. How do you know you're deficient? You stop looking forward to anything. Even rest feels sterile. Nothing excites you. Small tasks feel heavy. Your body is wired, but your heart is numb. You crave connection, but isolate instead. You crave silence, but flood yourself with noise. You crave peace, but mistake it for boredom. And the deeper tragedy, you think this is just adulthood, that maybe this is what maturity feels like. Dull, flat, responsible. But this isn't maturity. This is malnourishment of the soul. Daniel Goleman taught us that emotional intelligence includes self-regulation, yes, but it also includes self-care, self-awareness, and self-connection. When you don't receive regular doses of emotional richness, your ability to regulate and stay resilient fades. Your burnout accelerates. You stop listening inwardly. You lose the contrast between surviving and feeling alive. And yet, you keep going, because the modern world rewards you for ignoring your own depletion. It praises the hustle, celebrates the grind, measures your value by how much you produce, not how well you exist. But your nervous system keeps the score. Your heart knows. And eventually, the deficit becomes too big to hide. René Descartes said that the preservation of health is a duty, but health isn't only physical, it's emotional, psychological, spiritual. And if your inner ecology is barren, no matter how efficient your life is, it will collapse from within. So, what are the emotional micronutrients you need? Authentic connection, without judgment, presence, without distraction, silence, without shame, laughter, without performance, love, without condition, touch, without tension, gratitude, without obligation, stillness, without guilt, and truth, your truth, spoken or felt, even if it shakes the ground you stand on. These are not luxuries, they are requirements. You were not designed to live on duty and discipline alone. You need soul food, often, quietly, sustainably. Jordan Peterson speaks of responsibility as the path to meaning. And he's right, but only if that responsibility includes yourself. If you neglect the caretaker, you'll eventually have nothing left to give. Burnout isn't always a signal to stop everything. Sometimes it's a whisper that says, feed what matters again, because you're not empty by accident. You're empty because you forgot what it means to be full. Burnout isn't a problem, it's a messenger. You've been taught to see burnout as a malfunction, a weakness, a breakdown in the system, something to hide, fix, or outrun. You try new habits, better routines, supplements, strategies, anything to return to the version of you that once felt energetic and motivated. But what if burnout isn't something you're supposed to solve? What if burnout is something you're supposed to listen to? It doesn't show up randomly. It's not a glitch in your ambition or a failure of your strength. Burnout is a message your soul sends when the distance between the life you live and the life that feels true has grown too wide to ignore. It arrives not as punishment, but as proof that your deeper self still cares enough to protest. And the message it carries is simple: this isn't working anymore. Burnout doesn't mean you're doing too much. It means you've been doing too much of the wrong things for too long, with too little alignment, too little authenticity, and too little rest from pretending you're fine. It's not about effort, it's about disconnection. Disconnection from joy, purpose, embodiment, and your own truth. Andrew Huberman might say, your nervous system is firing signals of chronic dysregulation. Your body is alert, but without clear danger. Your mind is tired, but not allowed to rest. Your chemistry is off, not because you're incapable, but because you've been out of sync for so long that even small tasks feel like betrayal. Burnout is your biology and your spirit rebelling. It's not just a mental fog, it's your subconscious saying, I can't carry this identity anymore. I can't keep living like I'm a machine. It's a wake-up call disguised as fatigue. It's your intuition screaming through your nervous system that something vital has been silenced, and it refuses to stay silent any longer. René Descartes believed that self-awareness was the foundation of clarity. Cogito, ergo sum. But if thinking proves existence, feeling is what proves presence. And when you no longer feel alive in your own life, burnout becomes the emergency signal, not to destroy you, but to bring you back. Back to what? To what matters. To what's real. To what makes your heart beat more than a biological function. Burnout forces a confrontation. It makes you pause long enough to ask the questions you've avoided. Is this what I want? Who am I becoming? Why does this hurt? What have I been sacrificing for the sake of appearance, approval, or survival? These are not soft questions. They're not convenient. They are disruptive and necessary because they crack the shell you've been living inside, a shell of performance, pressure, and self-denial, and they create space for a more honest version of you to emerge. One who doesn't just function, but feels. One who doesn't just accomplish, but aligns. One who doesn't just survive, but chooses to live. Daniel Goleman reminds us that emotional intelligence begins with recognition. You cannot change what you won't name. And burnout, when honored as a messenger, becomes a powerful teacher. It doesn't ask you to shame yourself. It asks you to get curious. What have I been ignoring? What part of me has gone numb? What do I need to reclaim? Burnout is not a diagnosis. It's a threshold, a crossing point where the old version of you, who said yes too quickly, who smiled too much while suffering, who tolerated the misalignment for the sake of harmony, meets the beginning of a more honest existence. And that meeting? It feels like collapse, because a mask is falling off. An identity is cracking, but underneath that, something is waiting, something wild, unfiltered, alive. The burnout didn't come to ruin you, it came to reveal you. So stop treating it like an intruder. It's your body's letter to your consciousness. It's your nervous system knocking on the door of your soul saying, wake up, something has to change. And that change starts with you. The 3 questions that begin your recovery. You've reached the threshold. You've heard the message. You've faced the silence, the misalignment, the fatigue that sleep cannot fix. You know now, this isn't about being weak or broken. It's about being disconnected. But the question remains, how do I begin to return? Not to who you were, but to who you are beneath all that burnout tried to erase. The path back doesn't begin with plans or routines. It begins with questions, not for efficiency, for truth. Because healing starts where denial ends. And the only way to end denial is to ask what you've avoided for too long. Here are the 3 questions. They aren't easy. They're not designed for comfort. They're designed for clarity. And clarity, as Descartes believed, is the foundation of being. To exist meaningfully, you must know what inside you is real again. The first question is this: what have I been doing that my soul has never agreed to? This is the question of misalignment. It's not about right or wrong. It's about consent. Somewhere along the way, you started participating in things, jobs, conversations, roles, relationships that may have served a function but never served you. You didn't choose from a place of truth. You adapted. You survived. You molded yourself into who you needed to be. But every time you said yes, when your inner voice whispered no, you created a fracture. And one fracture at a time, you ended up living a life that looks right but feels wrong. Sit with that. What are you doing that your deeper self has never agreed to? What part of your schedule, your obligations, your persona feels borrowed, forced, inherited, or assumed? This is not about blame. It's about awareness. You cannot heal in a life that was built on silent self-betrayal. The second question, what part of me have I silenced the longest? This is the question of voice, of inner authority. There is a part of you that has been whispering under the noise for years.
A part that knows what brings you peace, what makes you feel whole, what used to make you smile when life was simpler. That voice might have been silenced by trauma, by fear, by rejection, or simply by the endless pressure to be productive. And yet, it still exists. Daniel Goleman describes self-awareness as the anchor of emotional intelligence. But awareness requires permission. You must allow yourself to hear what you've muted. What did younger you love that now feels silly? What truth do you carry that you've been too afraid to speak? What boundary have you been too exhausted to defend? Recovery isn't about becoming someone new. It's about removing the noise until you hear that silenced voice again, until you recognize it and trust it. The third question, what am I willing to lose in order to live aligned? This is the question of cost. Because the truth is, returning to yourself isn't free. You may lose approval. You may disappoint people who only loved the version of you that served their comfort. You may outgrow dynamics that depended on your silence. You may walk away from achievements that once defined your worth. You may risk judgment. But ask yourself, what's the alternative? To keep sacrificing joy for belonging, to keep trading peace for control, to live efficient but empty. Andrew Huberman would explain that the brain is plastic. It rewires based on repeated choices. And every time you choose what's true over what's easy, your brain learns safety and honesty. Over time, that builds a self that is not only stronger, but whole. You're not just recovering energy, you're reclaiming identity, and that will cost you comfort, but it will give you back presence. So ask the questions, not all at once. Ask them gently, honestly. Write them down. Sit with them. Let the answers come in fragments if they must. But ask. These 3 questions are not formulas. They are invitations, not to fix yourself, to meet yourself again, not to rebuild your old life, to finally begin the one that was waiting underneath the mask. How to reignite without burning out again. Now that the fire has quieted, you feel something return. Not a roar, but a flicker. Not ambition, not drive, but a soft pull toward life again. It's delicate, almost unfamiliar, like rediscovering light after years of living in grayscale. You've made space, you've listened, you've grieved, you've stopped pretending. And now comes the next question, the one your nervous system is quietly asking. How do I move forward without collapsing again? Because you've done this before. Started over, made promises, burned with passion until it burned you out. You know how to push. But now, after everything, you don't want to push anymore. You want to build a way of being that doesn't destroy you to maintain it. This is where real transformation begins. Not in the spark, but in the structure that protects the flame. The first truth you must accept is this: sustainability is more important than intensity. The world will praise you for breakthroughs, for hustle, for quick rises. But your nervous system praises consistency. Your soul praises rhythm. You are not here to live on highs. You are here to learn the art of staying. Andrew Huberman would explain that your dopamine system thrives not on overdrive, but on balance. When you chase high peaks, extreme productivity, validation, novelty, you create deep valleys. That's the loop that leads back to burnout. But when you learn to create steady, meaningful progress, the brain stabilizes, the body follows, motivation becomes sustainable, and joy, real joy, returns. So how do you protect the flame? You design your days around energy, not obligation. You listen inward before you say yes outward. You build rituals that support your nervous system. Walks without phones, mornings without rush, deep work without interruption, silence without guilt. You create a life that values integration over image. And most importantly, you move from alignment, not adrenaline. This is the difference between burnout and brilliance. Burnout comes from doing what drains you just to prove you can. Brilliance comes from doing what feeds you even if no one sees. René Descartes believed that the mind could master itself through clarity, but clarity is not passive. It's cultivated through attention, through pattern recognition. You must notice what begins to pull you back into the old cycle. Is it the need to impress? The fear of slowing down? The belief that rest must be earned? Every time you choose rest before collapse, you are building a new structure.
Every time you speak honestly instead of performing strength, you are choosing resilience over repetition. Every time you listen to the whisper instead of chasing the noise, you are anchoring in truth, not illusion. Jordan Peterson teaches that to move forward meaningfully, you must carry your load voluntarily. But that doesn't mean you carry everything. It means you discern what is yours to carry. That discernment is your protection now.
Not against effort, but against losing yourself in effort that has no soul behind it. And the soul behind it, that's what matters most. Because now you know the cost of abandoning yourself. Now you recognize the early signs, the quiet fatigue, the numbing, the detachment. And now, instead of powering through, you pause. Instead of performing, you breathe. Instead of reacting, you return. Return to the question, what nourishes me? Return to the promise, I will not disappear in pursuit of being enough. Return to the truth, I can be on fire without burning out. From here on, the path is not about how fast you go, it's about how honestly you move. So protect the flame. Shape a life that protects the conditions for your clarity, your strength, your softness. You've met burnout. You've heard its message. Now it's time to walk forward. Not as who you were, but as who you finally remember you are. The clarity invitation. You've made it here, through the fog, through the silence, through the collapse, through the weight of burnout that no one saw but you carried every single day. You've sat with your discomfort. You've looked at the fractures, not with judgment, but with curiosity. And now, there is something else waiting. Not a solution, not a 10-step plan, not a performance, but a return. This is your clarity invitation. Clarity is not about having all the answers. It's about no longer lying to yourself. It's about making room for the voice that has waited beneath the noise. That voice, the one you silenced for the sake of survival, perfection, approval, is still there. It never left. It only waited. And now it's asking, will you finally let me lead? Burnout, as brutal as it is, was never your enemy. It was your body's last act of love, your mind's final protest, your soul's refusal to live one more day disconnected from what's real. It brought you here, to this quiet moment, to this breath. And now, you choose. You don't need a dramatic reinvention. You don't need to escape your life. You need to change the relationship you have with it, to look at your days with softer eyes, to listen more closely, to stop measuring your worth by how much you accomplish and begin anchoring it in how much you align. To rebuild, not quickly, not for show, but from a place so honest, it humbles you. René Descartes believed that clarity was a byproduct of methodical reflection. But there's a kind of clarity that comes not from thinking harder, but from feeling honestly, from letting the truth land, not just in your mind, but in your body. That kind of clarity speaks in silence. It doesn't scream, It arrives slowly, like the first deep breath after weeks of shallow ones, like the first tear you finally let fall, like the first no that felt like a yes to yourself, like the first step in a direction that no one understands, but you do. This is the clarity that rebuilds you from the inside out, and it begins now. Ask yourself, what if I don't need to be more? What if I just need to stop being who I'm not? What if healing isn't something I have to fight for, but something that unfolds when I stop running? What if burnout was never failure, but the final invitation to remember myself? This is not a call to hustle, to rise and grind, to come back stronger. This is a call to stay. Stay with yourself long enough to notice what you've been avoiding. Stay in the pause until it softens the panic. Stay in your body until it teaches you how to trust again. Stay in the moment until it begins to breathe back life into your tired nervous system. You do not need to perform for your peace. You do not need to earn your way back into alignment. You only need to say yes to what's always been whispering underneath the noise. Come back. Come back to the version of you that doesn't need to be perfect. Come back to the pace that honors your nervous system, not punishes it. Come back to the breath, the walk, the quiet, the joy, the deep sleep, the slow yes, the brave no. Come back to yourself. The burnout didn't destroy you. It revealed what can no longer follow you forward. You don't have to be the person who survived anymore. You get to be the person who chooses now. So take a breath, not to prepare for another sprint, but to arrive, here, now, whole, finally. You're home. Let the flame burn, not to consume you, but to light the way you always knew deep down you were meant to walk.